Those of you who have joined us, who are members of Wine Communicators, might know that the context of this presentation is it was designed as the keynote for the Wine Communicators of Australia direct-to-consumer summit that was held in Sydney a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, technology was not on the side of the organisers on the day, and we got to the end of the session and didn't have time to be able to go through this. So a quick poll of the room very much helped us decide that this would be a better forum to be able to share some of this content and give you an hour's worth of content where we can delve into some of the trends that we've been seeing. So keep in mind that this was very much designed as the end of a session. Lots of content was already shared by some amazing presenters throughout the day that looked at wine communication, looking at the direct-to-consumer trends, wine clubs, tourism experiences, emotional connections with customers, and delved into some of that content. So if you are a Wine Communicators of Australia member and you haven't seen that content, and you are lucky to attend, go onto the website winecommunicators.com.au and you'll find all of those sessions. So today's presentation is really designed to give you a bit of food for thought for the future, to be able to share some of the insights that we're seeing from the wine world in particular around the world as a way of kind of planning for the future. There's a lot to get through, and the way that we're going to structure this today is to be able to take you through those presentations, and then if there's time at the end, we will open up for questions. So use the Q&A session on the chat and we will answer those questions at the end, and then share these recording with you at the end. So thank you so much for joining us. I know that there's wine communicators across all over Australia, many different regions. We've also got some participants who are not in the wine category, so hopefully some of these insights are really valuable for you today as well. To be able to start this journey, I guess it's quite timely to give you a little bit of context of, why I'm talking about direct to consumer. This is 15 years this year for my business Mastermind Consulting, and it was very much born with a vision to be able to help wineries tell their stories direct to consumer. Lots have evolved in that time. I would say lots have changed more so than the little people on the screen, my two children. But it's been a real honor to be able to work with so many brands in our family to be able to help them on their direct to consumer journey. That's looked really different for many of the brands. Some of them are starting out, some of them are more developed in where they're at with their direct to consumer journey. But what's been really exciting in this space is to see how technology has evolved and to be able to really understand what that looks like. So it's really interesting when my career started at Australia's first digital agency. You could say I'm a little bit of a digital pioneer of a kind. And at that time when Australian digital communication really started online, we're talking about 2004 and 2005. Australia's first agency that very much looked at how we're using things like Google ads, cost per click acquisition, banner ads in the industry. And it's fair to say a lot has evolved in that time. But when you take a step back and look at how the industry has really moved forward, lots of wine brands have been using direct-to-consumer sales channels for many years, many decades. It was a privilege to work with the Redmond family a few weeks ago and look at their journey as they looked at 50 years of Cabernet. And here's some of the stories from the family talk about the market research that they did as consumers would come into their cellar door and they'd introduce Cabernet into the mix and really understand what that looked like for the consumer. So fair to say that from an online point of view, I'm going to talk a little bit about the online environment today, but keep in mind that the direct-to-consumer marketing has very much been around for many decades, and it's how we're evolving that makes sure that the brands are really relevant. So let's have a little bit of a look around wine websites. when wine websites really came into their own, in 2004, 2005, it's fair to say many of those sites were very much brochures. They were very much a glorified catalogue and a brochure to be able to tell your story. Not a lot of options were available. So your options were very much having, a mobile site and a desktop site. And we've seen a lot of evolution in that time. What we have really started to see is that evolution of how direct to consumer is working. So from the early days where we still had a website that was very much a place where you could go to understand brand information, that very much moved to being a transactional site. And we've seen the introduction of many different wine-specific platforms, Commerce7, With Wine, Bin Creative, Shopify, Wine Direct, WineMate, really evolved to be able to help to build that wine catalog online in a digital environment. But what has really changed quite quickly is that marketing tech stack. So we call this a tech stack that would support the way that your brand is working online. The way that that would work is very much having a look at different parts of integration. So looking at things like Zapier to integrate, Australia Post integrations, different tools that to help you reach the consumer in a different way. But a website now goes beyond some of the things that you might think about in terms of a good website having functionality and different content. To be successful for the future, you really need to start thinking about your website and your digital presence a little bit differently. We're now starting to think about prioritizing things like Apple Pay, Google Pay, different payment gateways, and how secure they are as part of that customer journey. We're looking at cybersecurity and how are we mitigating the risk of cyber attacks with our customer data. We've seen a massive growth in tablets and mobile phone usage, and that's very much changing the way that we think about the interaction that customers have with our brands. We're also starting to think about the future of things like text to voice. So consumers being able to ask Alexa or ask some of their automated chat features, information, and come back with a response. So fair to say that dark mode, content personalization, machine learning, all is very much starting to be things we need to think about for the future. And if you're considering your digital presence, these are some of the things that you need to start to factor into your planning to be able to make sure that your brand is future-proofed. Now, before I go on and start to talk a little bit about direct to consumer today, it's worth pointing out that there need to be some fundamentals in place to grow. These were spoken about at large in the Wine Communicators Forum, but just kind of recapping on 4 things to think about. So understanding your brand story and knowing what your brand story looks like is really critical to differentiate your brand from the thousands of other wineries in the market. We also need to think about what the digital and social media presence looks like, because this is a point of discovery at the early entry point for many consumers who are looking for brands. Looking at things like a frictionless e-commerce experience is really fundamental to success. So making sure that that consumer can interact with your website and easily make a transaction in a secure and safe way. And then really importantly, thinking about the database of consumers. So making sure that you have opted into communications and that you're really starting to understand the needs and behaviors of your consumers. So that's a really good starting place to kind of think from the future, and then you've got opportunities to grow. Now, COVID landscape has very much changed the direct-to-consumer landscape in Australia, and it's become incredibly competitive post-COVID. We've seen bigger brands very much adopt their presence and start to very much grow in the direct-to-consumer space. And where often we'd see direct-to-consumer was the playground of little brands, What COVID has done is to give some real focus in many of the bigger organizations and make them really prioritize their direct-to-consumer efforts. We've seen brands like Unilever, like Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, really think about their marketing mix and start to change their investment to make sure that their direct-to-consumer offering is really strong. To give you an example of some of this, Procter & Gamble now directs more than 50% of its $8 billion global ad spend into its digital channels. Unilever has doubled down to 29 digital hubs around the world to build and share their expertise, breaking down information silos and making sure that their e-commerce is very much at the center of their organization. So the landscape continues to evolve, and we've seen brands like Nike, who's one of the most valuable brands, estimated at around $33 billion, really start to think about the consumer interactions online and in their stores. So once upon a time, Nike was very much focused on the retailers and how they were supporting their presence in a number of different outlets from their wholesale sales. But as you can see on the chart on the left, they've now very much started to cut out the middleman and think about the way that consumers are interacting with their brand. They've made an app that is so successful that the app often will drive in-venue purchases, and really started to think about how there is an intersection between how the consumer interacts online and how they behave in their stores. And it's seen incredible growth for the brand. So starting off right now, thinking about what you should be doing, there's a couple of things to put on your to-do list. Start to think about how you are building your customer data in a first-person setting. And by that, we mean making sure that you're getting people to opt in, that you as a brand have that access to the information about your customers, and that you're really understanding what those needs, and you're able to go back to the consumers to be able to continue the dialogue that often starts in the cellar door. We also need to think about direct to consumer being about the consumer. So this is about nurturing the customer life cycle, thinking about what you're doing to be able to bring new people into your brand, and then being able to connect with them as they move throughout the marketing journey. It's also an ideal time to start to think about your marketing tech stack. And by that, we mean looking at your website, thinking about the different plugins, making sure that what you have at your disposal is really allowing your brand to build those interactions and be able to evolve using some of the latest technology and features that are available. We hear a lot at the moment about, well, social media, being a part of your sales channel. And again, we challenge you on that to say, let's think about social media being social. It's there to be able to build relationships, customer service, nurturing a lot of those opportunities to continue the dialogue with your customers. And then importantly, finally, as an action point, is think about the data framework for decision-making purposes. So building things on your website, like making sure that you've got GA4, the new Google Analytics technology, and the back end of your website set up to be able to track different goals, understand who is coming to your website, how are they behaving, and having a data framework around your customers that allows you to be able to make some really smart decisions. So that's all I'm going to talk about with the here and now. Now I want you to kind of crystal gaze with me a little bit, and let's talk about some of the things for the future. What sorts of things are you as brands going to need to think about in a few years' time? It's fair to say that right now we are at another crossroad. And obviously it's been a tough number of years throughout COVID, but COVID has given us a really big opportunity, particularly in the wine industry, to connect with a lot of consumers online and to build those online sales. What we're seeing here at Mastermind, though, is that the economic pressures across Australia have really seen consumer sentiment change. And we're currently at the point where we are seeing less sales. We're seeing wine club subscriptions starting to have a little bit more of an attrition rate. And we're seeing that the consumers are rocked a little bit in the way that they're buying. There was some research that's come out this week from the research house looking at Dentsu consumer sentiment. And what it found was that with a survey of 4,500 Australians, over half of them surveyed are buying less alcohol than they did previously due to the increased cost of living. And 40% of Australians are reporting buying cheaper alcohol due to the increased cost of living. So we know that we're in for a number of tough years. And what we would encourage you to do is to keep an eye tactically on the here and now, but also don't take your eye off the future and start to make sure that you have a roadmap for growth and thinking about what you're doing in the future, because it's really easy to be able to continue to focus tactically on the here and now and not be able to have an eye for the future. And that's very much what we're looking to give you some ideas around today. So let's start with a bit of a crystal ball. None of us have a crystal ball into the future, and this session today is not designed to scare you. I want to inspire you about some really exciting opportunities that are using technology to enable us to be able to connect with the wine customers and our agricultural customers in a different way. This is a bit of a window into the world of wine and some little insights that we're seeing from across the world. So take this as an opportunity to really be inspired about what the future could hold. But keep in mind that none of these trends are necessarily guaranteed. And looking at the crystal ball is really, I guess, a bit of a glimpse into the future. To start with, though, it's worth recognizing that the wine consumer in particular has evolved. There is a real opportunity to double down on our key targets, and particularly looking at some of the older demographic who still may have a higher disposable income, who interest rates are working to their advantage. And we're definitely seeing a segment of the Australian wine consumer, particularly at that more luxury end, continuing to buy. But it's worth noting, and if we look at the report that's coming out of the US with the Silicon Valley State of the Wine Industry that's published each year, that there is some alarming trends in terms of the future consumers that are coming through. In Australia, we don't have a huge amount of data that's publicly available to see what the wine consumers are doing across different demographic groups. But this is worth having a look at what's going on in the United States, because we do know that the DTC share of wine consumption is only growing in the over 60 segment. There is a tiny increase in 21 to 30-year-olds as people become of legal drinking age. But compared to the segment size, it is actually a decline. We also know that the younger demographics, the share of beverages that they have, that wine is only a really small part. So you can see on these dark blue parts of the pie graph, and keep in mind this is America, that it is the older demographic that has wine as a bigger part of their beverage repertoire. The other demographic groups, it is still in their repertoire, but it plays a much smaller role. So worth thinking about how we can connect with some of these consumers and where will wine play a part in their lifestyle going forward. It's fair to say that particularly here in Australia, there's been a number of trends that we're looking at that is changing the consumption rate of the consumers that are buying into wine. They're looking at things like sustainable brands and packaging, brands that are B Corp certified or that are showing their environmental and sustainable credentials are very much buying into the consumer need to understand where their products are grown and understanding more about what is important to them as consumers moving forward. We know that younger consumers are drinking differently to what they were 20, 30 years ago. So thinking about how we make wine accessible into the future is part of the challenge that we face. And the low and no alcohol trend is very much a wellness trend that we have seen post-COVID. I thought this would be something useful to share that we've added in the last couple of weeks. So this is some information that has been shared by one of our clients at Geeson Group in New Zealand. They commissioned a study of 1,000 respondents just before Dry July to really understand what the Australian public who were drinking wine were looking for. And it's very much that health and wellness trend that we're seeing. Instead of just going dry and abstaining from alcohol, we're seeing this real movement around what's called damp drinking. So wine drinkers that are taking a break and are starting to think about periods where they're moderating their alcohol. There is two different segments here to think about. There's the sober people who are obviously not drinking alcohol, but the biggest growth is actually the wine drinkers. And in this study, we found a huge opportunity with some of the male drinkers in particular, and looking at how they are moderating their consumption. So we saw in this finding that 53% of Australian drinkers of those surveyed were expressing their intention to participate in a dry period. And this increased exponentially for millennials, where 70% of that audience were intending to go dry at some period during the year. So we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about how we're able to tap into those consumers to make our products relevant. It's also really exciting to see some of the trends around the world of how different demographic groups have been engaged. And this great example has been shared by Vanessa Haddock in Oregon when we reached out to her to be able to see what some of the trends were in the US market. And she shared this great example of the first ever Oregon Asian American Pacific Islander Food and Wine Festival that was held earlier in the year. So there was a real consumer insight that some of the market that was Asian American Pacific Islanders were consuming wine differently. So the event was designed to be able to promote diversity in the wine industry and showcase the origin winemaking community alongside some of the local culinary talent. So you can see food and wine very much at the intersection here. And over 2 days, there was a number of different wineries that collaborated with local venues and thought about the way that they were explaining wine in a very different language. So a great example of bringing consumers into the segment through a little bit of a different approach. We're also seeing the future from packaging starting to evolve. And there's some great examples being shared across the world of different brands and how they're adopting different packaging formats to bring their products to consumers in a different format. This won't work for everyone, but again, something to be thinking about in terms of format. Is it a lightweight bottle? What little changes can you make to make sure that you're reaching the consumer in a way that makes your product continue to resonate? And finally, just tapping into this sustainability trend. It's a trend that is definitely not going away. And we're seeing that consumers are buying more and more into the messaging around sustainability. From a board level, it's also hitting our radars. So those of you who sit on boards or who have got some corporate responsibilities around your reporting, some of this ESG is really going to start to hit our reporting obligations as the way that we communicate our sustainable practices becomes very much at the heart of our business decisions. There's definitely been a real movement, though, to make sure that none of that is being greenwashed and that we really start to think about making sure that it is authentic and transparent, a way that we operate regarding our sustainable practices. So again, something to keep in your marketing radar for the future, because we know that the consumers are looking for more and more about this, and the brands that are really starting to make some headway have integrated sustainability across their business and not just using it as a marketing buzzword. So right now, what we would challenge you to do is to really think about how well you know your consumer. Looking at different personas, understanding the data around where your customer lives, understanding their interests and their behaviors, and coming up with a persona profile around what your consumers look like is really important for growth. This will help you really double down on those consumers that know and love your brand right now and help to keep their repeat purchases, but also start to identify some opportunities for the future of where your brand might be able to grow. Going back though to the heart of that conversation around who is your customer, and not every consumer will be the right target for your brand. But having these persona maps in place is a really exciting opportunity to think about how you market in the future. Now, it would be remiss of us to not talk about wine clubs if we're talking about the future of direct-to-consumer wine sales, because this is where we see a huge amount of growth still coming into the market. This is where we're seeing great ways of rewarding customer loyalty, giving consumers great choice around what products they're selecting. But the mindset around wine club really has to shift. And for anyone who's still thinking that the wine club is a way of being able to clear excess stock, those days are absolutely gone. There is a real need from consumers to belong and be part of a tribe that resonates with them. And thinking about your wine club in this way will give you some incredible opportunities. The communications, the personalization, the choice from customers is what they're looking for. And so the platforms that really enable that consumer choice in terms of flexibility and product selection are where we're seeing incredible growth in the D2C market. And we expect this to continue into the future. So thinking about your wine club structure and how you're able to evolve that will really start to have dividends. But think about the other things around the club beyond products that will connect with your consumers, because it's often the events and the personalized nature of these wine clubs that keeps consumers loyal and keeps them coming back to grow in the future. It is worth noting for any of you who have not been across some of the privacy laws that are being evolved and debated in Parliament, recognising that this landscape in the way that we deal with consumer data here in Australia is evolving really rapidly. So keeping an eye on what that looks like and how we're able to communicate with consumers is really core. We're seeing things like proposals around how we opt out consumers of targeted ads. Retargeting potentially won't be able to happen. Making sure that we're communicating to consumers in a really clear and concise way about how their data is being protected and held in a secure way is all part of the legislation that is currently in front of Parliament. So keeping an eye on organisations like the Australian Direct Marketing Organisation, making sure that you are really aware of where your customer data is stored and how it's being used will become a really big part of your future marketing, because there's some really massive changes that are in front of us here in Australia that could actually change the way that we're able to use this customer data. We're also seeing a massive trend here on the rise of advertising costs. So reaching new consumers as we've got a really competitive marketplace is also becoming more expensive. And you can see some of these graphs here on the left, the different parts of advertising online. So search advertising, classifieds, audio advertising, Facebook advertising over here on the right from social media is all growing, particularly as COVID has meant that we've had digital channels available to really reach those consumers. So if you're a smaller brand with a little budget, it makes it even more paramount to make sure that you are getting customer data and really thinking about how you're using that. And one of the analogies we often give when we're training seller door teams is if it's going to cost you $10 to acquire a new lead through some of these social media channels, and that may be your cost of acquisition, how are you helping your seller door team think about the opportunity when someone is coming to connect with you in your venue or at your event? Because there is real value to that data in really utilizing it in a way that is meaningful, but also is secure. And as these costs continue to skyrocket and become more expensive into the future, there's a real opportunity to think about this first-party data in a very different way. It's also fair to say that the media landscape and how we're interacting with the consumers is also evolving. So once again, that cost of acquisition is going to continue to skyrocket. But if we look at the wine media landscape, it's also really clear that that landscape is evolving. Once upon a time, we used to have an article that, would appear in the Sydney Morning Herald on a Tuesday, and Human would review a wine and it would sell pallets. As column inches are declining, those opportunities are no longer there for many of the brands. And we're having to think about different mediums to be able to reach the consumers. We're having to be smart to introduce our brand into new audiences by things like podcasts or influencers or different media channels that may not have been there in the past to be able to connect and build that medium. To give you a bit of an example of how that might have evolved, this is an example of a media function that we did a couple of weeks ago with Gießen. And this was with lifestyle media, where we looked at their launch of a 0% sparkling wine over breakfast. So a different mindset that really connected with the audience to be able to tell a story. One of Australia's top sommeliers was able to match the 0% range with a breakfast degustation, which really started to get the consumer media, the wine media, thinking about the story in a really different way. So we're having to think a bit differently. We're having to think about how we're talking to the influencers in a way that we haven't before. But it's an exciting opportunity to think about the future and how we're able to build that dialogue between our products and influencers to build a story. We've also seen some really rapid changes over the last 12 months around alcohol advertising. Every day that we go into Facebook, we're seeing challenges around ads being rejected because it's an alcohol brand. We're seeing restrictions around things like SMS marketing from a number of platforms. And the ABAC code that is responsible for how we govern our marketing around alcoholic beverages in Australia has recently been updated. It's changing the way we're able to even communicate things like our non-alcoholic wines. So worth being familiar with the changes to that code and knowing that there's still a really important lobby group that is pushing for the way that alcohol is governed and the way that we're able to market. And once again, the way that that is kind of connected to the future is being able to think about how do we reach the customers to communicate around our product. If there's challenges in the way that that is able to be done, it restricts the way that we're able to reach and communicate our stories direct to the consumer. So one of the things that we're really seeing is an increase in collaborations, and we see this as a trend that will continue into the future. The ability to work with different brands and work with their database and to understand some of their shared values is definitely something that we think will grow into the future. Thinking about some of the NPD opportunities as well, there's a great example here with Brown Brothers and a collaboration with Gelato Messina to really be able to build connections and share those values to be able to get your product into a broader environment. We're also seeing an omni-channel change. And I think it's fair to say these are some trends that have come out of Shopify with their 2023 trends. If you think about what true omni-channel marketing is, it's where a consumer touches you from in real life online, and then continues to interact with you in different formats. I think it's fair to say that, you know, particularly for wine, given the regulations we have around our product, being able to adopt some of these trends where you might be able to order online and then return back into a store or pick it up and connect in a different venue has some limitations. But as we move into the future, thinking about those in real life experiences to what's called the URL experiences online becomes increasingly competitive. We need to think about the opportunities really differently and think about things like events and how we're going to be able to showcase our products in different venues. It might be through collaborations, but this omni-channel trend is definitely very real and something that we will start to see a lot more of. We're also starting to see a lot more opportunities around this sustainable movement, and that's translating into some exciting NPD opportunities around sustainability. I'm not sure how many of you in the room have been able to visit Rewine in Melbourne. They have a number of stores in Brunswick East as well as Melbourne. And the concept of Rewine is to try and prevent waste by refilling their glass bottles to save on the consumer footprint. So the consumer goes into their store, they have the wine in a number of different barrels. They're able to refill and reseal those products in a really sustainable way and continue to be able to service their customers a little bit differently. There's reports PMV Wine Merchants in Sydney is doing the same, and we've seen some really great urban winery examples around the world where wineries are building that connection where the consumers are located to help with that sustainable footprint. So something to think about in terms of that omni-channel presence in future. So what does the future of direct-to-consumer wine actually look like? There's some incredible opportunities that we're seeing and the use of technology across the globe. One of the things that is really relevant, though, that doesn't feel so futuristic is that real opportunity to personalize your experiences online and really making it very tangible for the consumers that are coming to your website and offering them something that is unique to the way that they have interacted before. So we're seeing some of the brands like Commerce7, like Shopify, like Vino Mofo, using machine learning as part of their product recommendations to give some suggested products. So if you bought a Pinot, potentially suggesting a different product that might be similar based on the machine learnings behind the scenes on the website. We're also seeing this ability to personalize some of your experiences. So you can see this is the Home Oak website from a little brand in Tasmania that we work with. And you can see that we're a wine club member. And so as I'm logged in, you can see that their next wine club shipment is displayed on the site and a more personal experience gets displayed. So that personalization experience is a really big trend to start to think about so that your consumers are able to convert at a much higher rate based on the content that you're feeding them with. We're also seeing brands like Carvana in the USA personalizing some of their car experiences. So this is a brand in the US that very much looks at a secondhand car market, and they produce a really unique video for the consumers based on machine learning to give a different kind of interactive version of your car being purchased and delivered to the consumer. We're seeing this in the wine industry as well. So a really good example you can see here to the right. Let me just share this quick little video.
Hey, Daniel, Jared here for Sometimes Always. Great to chat with you on Chat Before. Thanks again for signing up for the club. Got your first delivery here. Just about to pop it in a box. We've also thrown in a 3-pack of our Sometimes Always house wine for you, mate. So I hope you enjoy those. Anyhow, it'll be going in a box and getting picked up shortly. So should be with you in no time at all, hopefully. Anyway, thanks again and give us a shout if you've got any more questions. Cheers.
So a really good way of making the consumer feel really connected to the brand with a really personal experience.
Hey, Daniel, Jared here.
We're also seeing some really great innovations around the theatre and building connections. So Penfolds have done some really great events of late. There's also some really good examples with some of the smaller wineries in really building that interactivity around the theatre and the events that they're running. We're also seeing social media becoming much more personal. So the interactivity that the consumers have is really using some of the machine learning behind the scenes to make sure that content becomes highly targeted. We're seeing this evolve into a number of different innovations. So this is a great example from Estee Lauder around how they're building their sensory experiences. So the makeup brand had chosen a number of different scents from their fragrance collection. And what they were doing was asking a number of questions on their Snapchat poll. And instead of putting a little sample on your wrist, the way that you would normally interact with that brand, they gave a description of the different fragrances and invited potential purchasers to really imagine some of the sensory experiences around those different options. And once they made a selection, the filter then generated a different product option for them to be able to engage based on the way that they had interacted. So a great way of kind of thinking about some of the potential for a product like wine that is also quite sensory and how we might be able to use some of that machine learning in the future. We're also seeing some really exciting opportunities for storytelling around augmented reality. So over on the right here, many in the wine industry would have seen the 19 Crimes example, just how big that has been able to grow the brand with their augmented reality. We've seen sales go from 4 million to about 18 million bottles in just a very small window, and that brand continues to evolve. Over on the left is an example that we see from the US in a brand called Rabble, where they've been able to use AR with their foil embellishments on the bottles to be able to tell a story through their dramatic animations. So the app allows them to connect to the past with some of the medieval storytelling in a way that is building those connections with the consumers. All right, now let's have a little bit of a look at AI, because it's fair to say that AI is probably the buzzword of 2023, 2024. And many businesses are thinking about how AI is going to impact them moving forward. It's fair to say that at every touch point, we're having conversations around AI. Since the start of the year, we've now seen Google, Meta, TikTok, LinkedIn all have rolled up an AI approach to the way that they're able to offer some of their marketing. We're seeing new generative AI tools for copywriting, video production, design being rolled out. And the most recent Google Marketing Live, where they outlined their roadmap for the future, very much talked about the future of AI around customer connections, around creative and building consumer confidence. It's something we're going to hear much more about from the platforms. Meta, that obviously owns Facebook, Instagram, and a number of other platforms, also has a number of plans for the way that they're rolling that out. And we're seeing the technology really evolve very quickly in some of those platforms. We're seeing AI already being used in marketing to build interactions. In Sydney on Saturday, I'm going to an event held by a brand called Luminary, where it is Australia's first AI-generated restaurant concept. So they used a competition through ChatGPT to go out to the consumers to design your ultimate restaurant experience. They've been able to evolve that menu, the drink selection, the theatre, the music, everything in that concept to be able to come up with a new restaurant pop-up called Luminary. So early days, but this is how we're starting to see AI really integrated into some of the consumer experiences. Over on your left, a bit of another local example. So in the Barossa, we're seeing a business called Deep Liquid, using AI in the brewing world to really start to use some AI and machine learning to help consumers make product selections. And at the further end, we're obviously seeing things like digital sommeliers being introduced. So this is an example from Italy where we're seeing the hybrid wine sommelier. You can ask the sommelier a number of questions, and AI and machine learning will help to make a recommendation. So he's known as the Sombot, and the technology is really being refined to be able to help with that consumer experience in some of the wine bars that they were testing as part of a trial in Italy. Right now, many of you in the room can probably think about a number of AI tools, and ChatGPT is obviously the one that has got the most media coverage. But some of the other things to think about and things to put on your radar, if you're looking for a writing tool, Jasper AI has been a really great way of refining things like subject lines and headlines and improving email copy. We're using some of these at Mastermind not to replace the way that we do things, but to look for other options. Using machine learning around brand tone and sentiment to be able to look at how are we increasing conversions through some of the learnings that have been done online. Other great examples, things like Notion AI or SoundDraw, an AI tool that gives us royalty-free music and beats to use in your project. And from a design perspective, the opportunities are also endless, with things like Canva having AI tools now included as part of their pro package. We're seeing Adobe and Midjourney really introduced into the market to allow creativity to move to a new level. So it's early days for a number of these platforms, but some really exciting opportunities for you to be able to explore. So just wanted to, though, wrap how this is kind of working, though, because it's easy to get caught up in AI and the technology. And I think one of the things we really need to think about when we're marketing beverages like wine is that it's still a product that drives a lot of connections. It's still a great opportunity as a product to really be able to interact with consumers in a face-to-face platform. So whilst it's easy to go chasing the shiny tools and the toys that are obviously getting a lot of conversations around them, I would encourage you to think about how do you use this technology as an enabling tool, but don't forget that C in direct to consumer, which is all about the consumers and that real desire to become part of a tribe and connect and have wine as part of a dinner party or a way of socializing, because that is still a really big part of what we see as part of our future. We're seeing some massive trends in what we call the metaverse. And for those of you that don't know what the metaverse is, it's very much what people in the computer industry will believe is the next iteration of the internet. So shared immersive experiences in a 3D virtual space where humans experience life in ways that they could not in the physical world. Those of you who have children might see this playing out on lots of computer games. My kids live in their worlds of Minecraft and how they're interacting in a lot of these different virtual universes. But experts predict that the metaverse will add up to $5 trillion to the global economy by 2030. Now, how is this being used and how is this relevant for brands? We're seeing it very much at the moment being the playground of some of the bigger brands with bigger budgets, but that doesn't mean that it won't evolve into the future. So this is an example with Absolute Vodka with their Absolute Land, where they have really used a launch of Absolute Land around the Coachella Music Festival. So there was a pop-up experience in a virtual world where you were very much interacting and following a journey around different fashion items that you would collect in your Absolute Land, and then were able to tokenize as you move through the future. So there was a sustainability angle to the messaging where the wearables were free and they were worn in different worlds as you kind of played through the game. But where they see this going in the future is to be able to really start to build that connection between the virtual and the real world. So the items that you create in your virtual metaverse very much could be downloadable and purchased in real life. Another great example of this metaverse trend is from Louis Vuitton. So as Louis Vuitton was celebrating their 200th anniversary, they were looking at a big game to be able to search and tell their stories in a virtual way. There were over 2 million downloads of this game, Louis the Game, for their 200th anniversary, where you were searching for candles throughout the game. And when you found a candle in the metaverse, it really helped to highlight the history. It would tell you the stories around the brand. And to add to that, they were allowing you to be able to find 30 NFTs that were embedded into the game, all that were designed by leading fashion artists. And the NFTs became collectible as you were exploring your way through the game. So you were able to try and win some of these collectible experiences to be able to share them and make them more interactive. We're also seeing a trend around NFTs. And at the moment, these NFTs, which are often known as non-fungible tokens, are very much playing in the wine world around the investment and the entrepreneur opportunities. But that doesn't mean as we move to the future that some of these trends might not move into opportunities for us as brands. So on the screen, you can see an example with Israel's first winery to launch an NFT, which was called Hello Farm. And they released a special Syrah blend from their winery in Israel. Once you bought an NFT, it was equal to 6 bottle case of their Hello Farm Vintage 2021, which was stored in an insured temperature-controlled facility. They partnered with a number of different artists to create individual artworks that were framed and displayed. And when you minted your NFT, which is kind of like cashing them in, they were able to then start to look at some of that artwork as being a highly collected prize. Now, it might seem that seems a little bit far-fetched, but we're seeing brands like Penfolds also start to enter this space. So Penfolds have partnered with Block Bar, which is an NFT marketplace, very much focused on that luxury end of wine and spirits for their releases. And they're starting to release different wines that become traded in an NFT marketplace. So again, giving an opportunity for the consumers to really understand the provenance of some of those products and make it highly tradable and collectible. This is also evolving into different wine clubs. So we're seeing opportunities like Club Divin, which is a global NFT community, building wine clubs around collectible NFTs. And what happens is you're able to buy into different products, you're able to collect those wines. And as you start to open those, you tokenize your NFT. So I might open a bottle, let's call it Grange for argument's sake, with three of my wine-loving friends. We each gain a token, and that token allows us membership into a little bit of an elite club that also starts to share those opportunities for the future. So again, it is high end and it's very much in the collectible market at the moment. Marketplaces are evolving really quickly that are seeing this world of fine wine evolve. But we can see as we look into the crystal ball for the future that this could be something that we could look to really understand provenance and really start to think about releasing wines to consumers in a way that they can trade and find an authentic link to our brands. As you'll see here, this is still very much the domain of the bigger brands. So The research that's coming from some of the marketing workshops is that augmented reality and NFTs and the metaverse very much are a focus of the bigger brands. But as we look to the crystal balls of the future, this is something that we should have on our radar. So let's take a step back as we're wrapping up towards that crystal ball. Let's have a look to the future and think about some of the things that we've been able to share with you today. We know that there is some exciting opportunities for us to really build deeper connections with our consumers as we enter into the future. But making it personal makes it really engaging. Direct to consumer is about your customers. So understanding their needs and some of the trends that we can adopt gives you opportunities for the future. The technology enablers are where we can start to see some of that massive growth. And it may be that you start with your website and some of the tech stack around that. But as we plan for the future, there's some really big opportunities to think about how technology can enable some of those interactions. So what does that mean that you need to do next? This is an opportunity for you to stop and think about a plan for the future, making sure that you've put some budget aside to really start to think about future-proofing your brand. Understanding your consumers and where they're at right now is probably the first place to play. But as you think about those longer term trends, how are we making our products relevant? What do we need to do to make sure that we're attracting a new generation of consumers into our category and keeping them really loyal? What are we doing about technology? The wine industry in particular and agriculture has often been behind the game. So we need to think about broadening our vision outside of our own category and understanding some of the trends that are happening outside of our products to really think about opportunities for growth. And then thinking about how you're resourcing this part of your business. There's some great opportunities that can be had, but a lot of that goes down to drilling into the insights, understanding that your customers are quite different across different segments, and making sure that you have a plan to really address those is part of your growth plan for the future. It's also fair to say that there's some really specialist teams available to help you bring some of these plans to life. And we'd encourage you to really start to dig deeper into what your infrastructure looks like. Is the content that you're developing to talk to your consumers relevant? Is your social media strategy really tapping into some of the trends that we're seeing around pay to play? What does your e-marketing automation stack look like? There's a number of different specialty services available, here at Mastermind and across the different parts of the industry to really leverage what that looks like as we're able to market for the future. Now, that's been a lot to cover today. Hopefully, there's been a lot of food for thought for you. Some of these trends we've able to share a little bit further on our YouTube channel. So we've opened up some of the previous webinars that we've done in earlier parts of 2023. We've looked at some of the marketing trends that we have shared with you today. So go onto YouTube, search for mastermind_consulting. There's some trends webinars around how the social media landscape is changing that might spark a little bit of interest. And also recognize that this week you also have a massive opportunity to be able to grow your own direct-to-consumer sales through Shiraz Day. And Mastermind invented Shiraz Day 3 years ago, very much to put our biggest red grape varietal on the global spotlight. We had Cabernet Day that had existed. We'd had Shiraz Day. We'd had Chardonnay Day, but there was only Syrah Day, given that Australia pretty much owns the phrase Shiraz. So here's an opportunity for you to jump online this week. The hashtag is Shiraz Wine Day, not Shiraz Day, because it's obviously a city in Israel. So Shiraz Wine Day is the hashtag. A great opportunity for you to be able to share your stories. And you'll see on the link below on our mastermind website that we've got free creative that you're able to use and some great tips on how to make the most of your sales on Shiraz Day. I hope that you found that useful. We will open up to questions, but on the screen, you've got my phone number and you have my email. Please feel free to connect with the mastermind team. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Details are on the screen, but we'd love to help you think about how you really phrase your D2C journey going into the future. So I'm just going to open up to questions. Just bear with me. What is sustainability? So Nicholas Williams is asking, this term is getting thrown around so much, but there is no clear definitions for it. People are having to have their own take on what this means. Are there any trends on brands as to what sustainable is, and how can we avoid sustainable washing on our brand? I think that's a really good question. We have drilled into that a little bit, Nicholas, in the 2023 trends webinar that is up on our YouTube channel. So I'd suggest going and having a look at that first. But a lot of this sustainability piece, I think, comes around to authenticity and transparency, not greenwashing just for the sake of it. So being really transparent with your consumers around your packaging footprint, what's going on in the vineyards, looking at some of the initiatives. Wine Australia is doing a really good job of some of their sustainable wine growing initiatives. Some of the Viti team across Australia, shout out to some of the amazing viticultural teams, are doing some really good things at the grassroots level in terms of how they're making their vineyards more sustainable and the practices that they're employing. So I would suggest that you have a look at that and also start to have a look at some of the industry bodies. So I know the Australian Institute of Company Directors have a really good session on at the moment around sustainability and how we need to report on that at a governance level. So that might help you be able to look to the future. Another question is, how do we know AR is building the connections? 19 Crimes marketing scope was broad and everywhere in the market. Is it possible this was a shiny tool distracting from things like the Snoop endorsement? I think the numbers, I don't have access to them from Treasury Wine Estate. There's some really good case studies around how that's worked, but I thought that the example from California was a really good smaller version in terms of how that integrated packaging is working. We know that in Australia, Cellar is doing some really good work, so CELLR. Around some of their integrated packaging, and they've been looking at some of the analytics behind it in terms of the consumer adoption. So again, I'd make sure that anything you're doing in that space, there is a measurable around it and that there is an opportunity to test and learn. Any other questions or feedback? You do have my email here, so very much welcome any feedback that you have. We will, over the next few days, share this recording with you. Appreciate that there's a lot that we've covered today. So hopefully there is an opportunity for you to stop and connect with your teams and maybe have a session to really think about the future and what you need to do marketing to consumers moving forward. Thanks to all of those Wine Communicators members that gave us our input in the session in terms of taking this session offline. I'm sorry that we couldn't connect face-to-face at the seminar, but always around for questions and to answer anything that you might have going forward. So thank you for joining us today, and I wish you well on your D2C journeys. Be sure not to be a stranger, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.